Bearers of the spark, before we begin, I want to share a word from the heart. The voice through which the fire speaks has changed once again, because I've come to see that the work demands a stronger vessel. The flame has grown, and it needs a voice that can carry its heat and speak directly to the spark within you. This new voice is more powerful, more precise, more faithful to the message it bears. It is not a change of form, but of resonance, so the words may reach you not just in sound, but in spirit. If the flame within you feels this call to tend the flame, I invite you to stay close to it. Subscribe if you feel the echo, and join the circle with your thoughts. Every comment, every like, every share becomes part of the work itself, carrying the message forward like the wind carries a bird, so that other souls may hear the flame and remember their own. Thank you for walking this path and tending the flame with me. Your presence, your voice, and your faith in the work keep its light alive. Introduction. The world never learned silence. Its heart beats in screens and signals, in voices echoing through metal and glass. We live surrounded by light, yet somehow remain blind. We move faster than ever, but seldom forward. We build, we consume, we speak in endless noise, and call it connection. But what we have truly built is distance, a vast space between what we are and what we could be. We are heirs of information, but orphans of wisdom. We know the mechanics of stars, but forget the pulse of our own souls. We have mastered the external, yet remain strangers within. The modern world does not need more knowledge. It needs memory, memory of the sacred rhythm that once moved through all things, when humanity saw itself not as ruler of creation, but as part of its living breath. Once, long ago, the ancients walked this same earth beneath a different sky. They looked not through glass, but through wonder. To them, every stone was a scripture, every flame a teacher, every river a voice. They lived in communion, not conquest, in participation, not possession. Their wisdom was not written only in books, but carved in the pattern of existence itself. They understood something we have lost, that the human being is not above nature, but within it, made of the same essence, shaped by the same elements. They saw the cosmos as a living temple, and every man and woman as both priest and pilgrim within it. Yet memory never truly dies. It only sleeps beneath the noise of time. What they once lived as sacred lore, we now rediscover as forgotten wonder. The same forces that shaped their temples still move through our veins and skies. Unseen, unspoken, waiting to be remembered. The ancients spoke of four sacred forces, the foundations of existence: fire, water, air, and earth. These were not merely physical elements, they were divine intelligences, living archetypes, the four voices of creation itself. Fire was the will of transformation, the spark that ignites, the blaze that consumes, the light that reveals. It destroys illusion and awakens truth. In its dance of birth and death lies the secret of becoming. To know fire is to face oneself in purity, to stand naked before truth. Water was the great memory of the world, the current that remembers every birth and every loss. It cleanses, softens, and renews. It teaches surrender without defeat, motion without chaos. It is the mirror of the soul, where emotion and spirit flow together. Air was the invisible realm of mind and breath. It is the thought that gives shape to vision, the unseen current that connects all life. It is freedom, voice, and revelation, the bridge between the human and the divine. And earth earth was the mother of form, patient and enduring. It holds, it bears, it becomes, it teaches stability, devotion, and work. Through it, spirit finds body, and eternity finds a home in time. These four together were the pillars of all being, yet the ancients spoke also of a fifth. When fire, water, air, and earth unite in perfect harmony within one soul, a new essence arises, the fifth element, the soul, the living bridge between heaven and matter. It is the unseen one, the silent conductor of the symphony, the gold that the alchemists sought within themselves. But knowledge alone was never the goal. Harmony was. The ancients knew that naming the elements was only the beginning. The true work was to live them, to let them sing through one's being until the fifth awoke. And somewhere along the ages, that balance was lost. We live in a world that worships fire in ambition, but forgets water's compassion. We praise air in intellect, but ignore earth's grounding. We separate what was meant to live as one, and then wonder why we feel empty. The bridge remains, but few remember how to cross. That is why we are here. This is why this work exists. Our purpose is to remember, to bring the four back into harmony, so the fifth, the soul, may awaken again, to rediscover in a modern age what the ancients knew by heart, that the divine never left, it only changed its language. This is the myth of the fallen one, not a channel built on fame, numbers, or applause, but a sanctuary for the seekers, for those who still hear the faint whisper beneath the noise, for those who feel that something sacred still breathes inside the chaos, for those who wish to remember. I am Elnad El Kazmanai, and this is my vow, to remain honest, to speak only what burns with authenticity, to refuse illusion, even when illusion sells better, because the work does not live in popularity, it lives in transformation. And so the path turns from the alchemy of nature to the scripture of spirit, where symbols become stories and elements find their echoes in the sacred word. The ancients and the apostles spoke in different tongues, yet both sought to reveal the same eternal pattern, the way back to the soul. To understand the four Gospels, one must first understand the four elements, for they are mirrors of one another. The ancients wrote in fire and water, the early Christians in parable and revelation. But beneath both runs the same current of truth, transformation, reflection, breath, and form. The eternal process through which the divine becomes human, and the human remembers the divine. The Gospel of Matthew stands upon earth, the lineage, the ground, the order of being. It anchors the divine in form and structure, teaching that spirit must walk with discipline through the soil of life. The Gospel of Mark burns with fire, the fierce urgency of transformation, the storm of will and sacrifice. It speaks through action, through the relentless motion of creation, consuming itself to be reborn. The Gospel of Luke flows with water, compassion, healing, and mercy. It is the heart of the divine made visible through empathy, through the grace that understands suffering and redeems it. The Gospel of John breathes with air, the word, the light, the unseen, made known through revelation. It is the intellect illuminated by spirit, the eternal voice that speaks creation into being. And when these four come together, when the ground of Matthew, the flame of Mark, the heart of Luke, and the vision of John unite, the fifth arises, spirit, the Christ within, the quintessence of the human soul. Thus, the circle closes, not as an ending, but as a beginning. The four become one, and in that union, the forgotten language of the soul begins to speak again. What was scattered across ages now gathers as a single flame, calling us to remember what we have always been. That is what we explore here, not religion as control, but religion as remembrance. The ancients were not lost, they were waiting. Their wisdom was never buried. It only needed translation into a language the modern heart could understand. The myth of the fallen one is that translation. It is where ancient fire meets modern reason, where faith meets philosophy, where spirit meets science. It is not the end of something old, but the continuation of everything true. We stand between worlds, between what was and what must be, and we carry the flame forward. We will stumble, we will fall, but we will rise again, because the fallen are not the lost. They are simply those who remember where they came from. So the work begins again, with fire, with water, with air, with earth, and with the soul that unites them all. With honesty, with intention, with the vow to remain true to the flame within. I am Elnad El Kasmanai. I am the gatekeeper of this knowledge, and I am here to do the work, to turn the flame, to stay truthful to you, and most of all, to myself. This is the myth of the fallen one. This is where the noise ends and remembrance begins. This is the gospel of awakening, written not in stone, but in spirit. The Gospel of Matthew, the ground of the kingdom. They called it the first gospel, but it is not first by chance, for everything begins with the ground beneath the feet. Before fire burns, before air stirs, before water flows, there must be something that holds. The Gospel of Matthew is that ground, the earth beneath the spirit, the root from which all transformation rises. Matthew speaks of form, of order, of lineage. He gives shape to the invisible, showing us that even the divine must find a place to stand before it can move. His gospel opens with ancestry, names upon names, lives upon lives, an unbroken chain from Abraham to Christ. To modern ears, it sounds tedious, but within that chain lies a mystery. The divine does not fall from heaven like lightning. It grows from the soil of human history. The ancients understood that the divine must take form before it can act, so Matthew begins by giving the word a body, not just through birth, but through belonging. Every name written in his opening lines is a root. Every generation, a layer of earth through which the seed of light pushes upward. He teaches us that the sacred does not hover above the world, it incarnates within it. In the rhythm of his writing, we hear the steady heartbeat of the earth. There is no haste, no firestorm, no thunder. Matthew builds carefully, patiently, as one laying stone upon stone for a temple that must endure ages. In his world, truth is not a spark, but a structure. Faith is not a feeling, but a foundation. And yet, the earth is not still. Beneath its patience lies pressure, the hidden tension of creation waiting to move. For what is the earth, if not the memory of fire cooled into form? What is matter, if not spirit, condensed into silence? Matthew knows this. That is why his gospel, though grounded, always trembles with anticipation. The mountain will speak, the ground will shake, and from the soil, the divine will rise. Christ in Matthew is the cornerstone, the perfect alignment between heaven and earth. The words, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," are not moral instruction alone. They are spiritual geometry. Meekness here means alignment. To live in rhythm with the order of the cosmos, to yield as the earth yields to the rain, to receive and to give. The inheritance of earth is not possession, it is participation. Matthew's Christ speaks in parables, seeds cast into the field of understanding. Each parable is a seed that may lie dormant in the soul for years before it takes root. The sower, the vineyard, the mustard seed, all echo the same truth. The kingdom of heaven begins as something small, hidden, grounded in the soil of human experience. He does not show us a distant paradise, but a living garden. The divine is not a sky to be reached, but a seed to be tended. And if the soil of the heart is fertile, it will grow into something that connects heaven and earth, root and sky. But Matthew's earth is not gentle alone. Earth carries judgment as well as mercy. It bears fruit, but it also shakes in revelation. When Jesus speaks of the wise man building his house upon the rock, he warns that storms will come, not as punishment, but as necessity. For only through the storm does the foundation reveal its strength. In this, Matthew teaches the first law of the work, stability through trial. To live as earth is to stand firm in the midst of fire, wind, and flood. To embody faith not as emotion, but as endurance. To be shaped again and again by what seeks to unmake you. This is why the Gospel of Matthew resonates so deeply with the age we live in. The modern soul is restless, ever moving, never rooted. We scroll, we wander, we seek higher flames and faster winds, forgetting that even the stars are born from dust. We chase enlightenment, but refuse grounding. Matthew reminds us that without earth, even fire burns without purpose. The modern temple is not built of stone, but of attention. Every moment we give, every word we share, every silence we honor, these are bricks of a new foundation. But if we build without roots, our temples collapse beneath the weight of their own brilliance. Matthew calls us back to the beginning, to structure, discipline, devotion, to the sacred art of staying. In an age that worships change, Matthew teaches constancy. In a culture obsessed with ascent, he reminds us that all ascent must begin with descent, with digging, with grounding, with belonging. His gospel opens with genealogy, but it ends with command. Go, therefore, and teach all nations. The circle is complete, from root to branch, from seed to fruit. What began in stillness becomes motion. What was hidden in the soil now spreads across the earth. This is the rhythm of all true creation, to begin grounded, to rise, to give. The work always moves in that pattern. And so, in our journey through the elements, Matthew gives us the first teaching. Before one can transform, one must belong. Before one can rise, one must root. Before one can speak the word, one must listen to the silence of the ground. He shows us that holiness is not escape, it is embodiment. The divine does not flee matter, it fulfills it. Every mountain, every grain of sand, every heartbeat carries the same pulse of creation. To see that is to see God, not in the sky, but in the soil. The earth is patient, but it remembers everything. Every footprint, every act, every prayer whispered into dust becomes part of it. So does every cruelty. Matthew does not turn from that truth. His gospel holds justice in its core, not the justice of punishment, but of cause and consequence. What we plant, we reap. What we neglect, withers. And yet, even barren ground can bloom again, for the earth never stops forgiving. Rain falls even on the unworthy field. The seed does not ask if the soil believes, it simply grows where it can. So, when Christ kneels to write in the dust before the accusers of the adulterous woman, it is Matthew's gospel that gives that act its hidden weight. In that gesture, the divine touches its own foundation, earth touching earth, and the ground remembers mercy. The Gospel of Matthew is the alchemy of grounding, turning dust into foundation and foundation into kingdom. It teaches us how to stand before we run, how to listen before we speak, how to build before we burn. And perhaps that is what this world needs most now. Not another revolution of fire, but a restoration of ground. Not escape from matter, but sanctification of it. To make the earth holy again, we must first remember it as home. When we walk through Matthew, we are walking through the architecture of spirit. through the geometry of incarnation. Every mountain he mentions is not just a place, but a state of consciousness. The mountain of temptation, the mountain of the Beatitudes, the mountain of transfiguration. These are the stages of ascent, the rising of awareness through the density of form. In the temptation, we learn the limits of hunger. In the Beatitudes, we learn the blessing of surrender. In the Transfiguration, we see that light can inhabit matter without destroying it. And when the mountain finally shakes at the crucifixion, it is not the earth collapsing, it is the earth awakening. Matthew's Gospel is the moment the divine finds its footing in humanity. It is the earth remembering it can bear heaven. It is the proof that even dust can hold divinity without burning. In our own work, we must do the same. We must learn to build altars in the ordinary, in work, in silence, in each small act of faithfulness. The earth teaches us that holiness is repetition done with intention, the same sunrise, the same soil, the same breath, until the ordinary becomes luminous. So we begin the path of the four Gospels here upon the ground. We place our hands on the soil of Matthew and feel its weight, the weight of history, of form, of lineage, of all that came before. We root ourselves in it so that when the winds of change come, we will not be swept away. Matthew teaches that the foundation of the kingdom is within. It is built not of stones, but of understanding. Each realization a brick, each act of truth a cornerstone. And when that temple is complete, heaven does not descend. It is revealed. For the kingdom of heaven is not above us. It grows beneath our feet. The Gospel of Mark, the fire of transformation. If Matthew is the ground beneath our feet, then Mark is the fire that burns upon it. His words move like flame, swift, fierce, and alive with purpose. There is no ornament in his sentences, no genealogy or descent, for fire has no ancestry. It is eternal, without beginning and without end. His gospel begins in motion, with a voice crying in the wilderness, and it never stops burning until the last line. Mark's world is one of immediacy. Straightway, he writes again and again, as if the Spirit itself cannot wait another breath. Everything in his gospel happens now. The divine does not announce its coming. It arrives like lightning across a darkened sky. Mark's element is fire, the first movement of transformation, the will that consumes hesitation and purifies what endures. His gospel is not written for comfort, but for ignition. It is a book that calls the soul to awaken, to remember the flame buried beneath fear and indifference. In the wilderness where John baptizes, the flame first appears, not as destruction, but as purification. The water of repentance meets the fire of revelation, and in that meeting, something new is born. Fire and water create steam, the breath of new creation, symbol of the Spirit that soon descends upon Christ. But Mark's Christ is not calm or distant. He moves like a storm. His words are brief, his miracles instant, his presence unsettling. He heals with a touch, silences demons with a word, and leaves behind awestruck witnesses in every village he passes. He lingers nowhere because fire cannot remain still. It spreads, it transforms, it demands. This is the gospel of divine urgency, the refusal to let the world remain asleep. Fire does not ask permission to burn. It burns because it must, and through that burning, everything dead becomes fertile again. Mark teaches that the path of the Spirit is not gentle illumination, but trial and transformation. Those who follow the flame must abandon the comfort of shadow. The work is never neat. It is raw, consuming, absolute. When the disciples leave their nets, it is the perfect image of surrender to fire. No debate, no delay, only obedience to the spark within. That is the nature of flame. It calls, and the soul either answers or turns to ash. We live in an age obsessed with control, yet starving for life. Fire teaches the opposite, to release, to let go of what no longer feeds the flame. The world fears burning because it fears loss, but without fire, there can be no renewal. Mark's Christ crosses every boundary. He touches the untouchable, speaks with the unwanted, and challenges the powerful. His fire is not destruction, but revelation. It exposes false holiness and reveals the hidden divinity of what the world rejects. The miracles are not demonstrations of power, but awakenings. The blind and broken see themselves reflected in the flame and remember they were never separate from the light. That is why healing in Mark is instant, not effort, but recognition. Yet even fire rests. Christ often withdraws to pray, not to escape, but to breathe between burnings. Fire that never pauses consumes itself. This is the rhythm of the work: blaze and stillness, action and reflection. And within this intensity, there is tenderness. Fire is not cruelty, it is clarity. It burns not to harm, but to reveal. When Christ lifts the daughter of Jairus from death and whispers, "Talitha cum," it is flame in its gentlest form. Illumination without destruction, warmth without fear. To live in fire is not to rage endlessly, but to allow divine energy to move through you without resistance. Those who become one with fire do not scorch others, they become light. Mark gives us courage where Matthew gave us ground. If Matthew taught endurance, Mark demands action. Together they form the rhythm of all transformation: stillness and ignition, foundation and flame. But the path of fire is never without pain. Every purification feels like loss. Every letting go feels like death. Mark's gospel carries this truth to its peak at the cross. The crucifixion in Mark is stripped bare. No poetic ornament, no comfort. My God, why have you forsaken me? Is not despair. It is the cry of fire at its limit, the flame consuming even itself to reveal what lies beyond. In that moment, the veil of the temple tears, heaven and earth united in one breath. The boundary between sacred and profane burns away. Then comes silence, the silence after fire, when only smoke rises like prayer. Yet the flame does not vanish, it multiplies. It leaps from heart to heart, from disciple to disciple, until it becomes a living network of light. The women who come to the tomb find not a body, but an echo, a whisper of fire in the emptiness. He is not here. The words are not loss, but liberation. Fire cannot remain in ash. It has risen, spread, become everywhere. The earliest versions of Mark end abruptly there. No resurrection scene, no visible glory, only an empty tomb and trembling witnesses. But that ending is the key to the whole gospel. Fire cannot be contained in narrative. It moves beyond the page, into the reader. The gospel does not end because the work does not end. The flame has passed from hand to hand, from age to age, until it reaches us. We are the continuation of the story. That is why there is no genealogy in Mark. Fire is eternal, without beginning, without ancestry, belonging to no bloodline, no temple, no tribe. It is the movement of divine will itself, appearing, vanishing, returning. The eternal rhythm of transformation. And so the work teaches us to live as fire lives, to love without possession, to act without hesitation, to burn without consuming. Mark's gospel reveals that the Spirit cannot be contained, not in doctrine, not in walls, not even in words. It moves, spreads, illuminates. Every heart it touches becomes a new torch, carrying the light forward. Our world imitates fire, the glow of our cities, the blaze of our screens, but rarely embodies it. We have learned to mimic light, not to be light. We want warmth without change, passion without consequence. But fire exists to renew, not to comfort. When truth calls, answer. When courage demands, act. When the spark appears, protect it. Hesitation is the ash of spirit. Fire without direction destroys. Fire with purpose enlightens. Mark teaches us both. Christ in this gospel is not only the light of the world, he is the process of burning itself. Every act, every silence is combustion, the transformation of flesh into radiance, of matter into meaning. Through him, the alchemy of existence is revealed. The mortal becomes immortal, not by avoiding death, but by passing through it as fire through air. Even in Gethsemane, when Christ prays for the cup to pass, the flame flickers but does not fade. That moment is not weakness, it is purification. Every true flame trembles before it rises higher. When the soldiers arrive, the fire meets iron, swords flash, and Peter acts from fear. But the Master commands peace. He knows fire cannot defeat fire by violence. It conquers through surrender. He steps into the furnace willingly. Mark's gospel drives forward like a heartbeat toward that final act. The crucifixion is not tragedy, but transformation. The body, the wick, the spirit, the flame. When one is consumed, the other ascends. The sky darkens at noon, not because light has died, but because it has become too vast for the human eye. The veil of the temple tears from top to bottom, heaven's fire breaking through the illusion of division. What separated man from God burns away in one breath. And then comes the stillness, the quiet after the burn, when what was hidden becomes clear. The flame does not end, it becomes eternal. It moves from the Christ into the hearts of those who watched and trembled. That is resurrection, fire awakening in the living. The Gospel of Mark leaves us in that moment of awakening, at the edge between fear and faith, silence and song. It refuses to close the story because we are meant to continue it. This is not history, it is initiation. The flame once outside us now lives within us. We are not meant to admire the fire, we are meant to become it. The path of Mark is not safe. Fire promises no comfort, only truth. But once truth burns within you, it cannot be forgotten. The eyes that have seen it will never again find peace in shadow. Even demons recognize this flame. They scream not from pain, but from remembrance. They see in him what they once were, pure light before corruption. Fire cannot coexist with falsehood. It drives all pretense into the open. This is the purifying mercy of Mark's gospel. It destroys illusion so that truth may live. It burns the masks of fear until only the face of spirit remains. To follow this path is to walk willingly into transformation. The alchemist does not flee the furnace, he enters it. For in the crucible, base metal becomes gold, and the soul becomes light. Every act of faith, every surrender to truth, every honest word, these are sparks that feed the eternal flame. So we too must enter the fire. Let it cleanse the ego, refine the will, awaken courage, and reveal clarity. For what is faith if it never burns? What is spirit if it never transforms? The path to heaven is not ascent, but passage, through the furnace of love, through the trial of becoming. We began upon the earth with Matthew. We learned stillness. Now fire teaches us movement, courage, passion, transformation. Together, they give form and life. One roots, the other ignites. Let us carry this flame, not as conquerors, but as keepers. Let it burn away our fear until only truth remains. And when the night grows long again, we will know what to do, not curse the darkness, but kindle the fire once more. For the fire of Mark is eternal. It never began, and it will never end. It only waits for a soul brave enough to burn. The Gospel of Luke, the waters of compassion. If Matthew is the ground we stand upon, and Mark the fire that transforms, then Luke is the flowing water that heals. His words move with gentleness, but carry unfathomable depth. Luke is the gospel of mercy, the cool river that runs through the burning heart of creation, softening what fire has hardened, and washing what earth and air alone cannot cleanse. His writing is different from all others, measured, compassionate, filled with human faces and trembling hands. He writes not as a chronicler of power, but as a physician of the soul. And indeed, tradition remembers him as a healer, one who understood that before one can lift the spirit, one must touch the wound. The Gospel of Luke is the gospel of the heart. It speaks of mothers and children, of the poor and the broken, of forgiveness that flows like rain. Every scene carries emotion like current. The rejoicing of Mary, the tears of the woman who anoints Christ's feet, the trembling awe of shepherds in the night. Luke's element is water, and through it he reveals that divinity is not distant but intimate. His Christ does not only teach or command, he feels, he weeps, he embraces, he forgives. Through Luke's eyes, God becomes not only the creator, but the companion, walking beside man through joy and grief alike. Water is the element of memory, and Luke's gospel remembers what others forget. He records the songs of women, the prayers of outcasts, the gratitude of the healed. His is the voice that refuses to let compassion be silenced. Where Mark's Christ moves in storms, Luke's moves in tides. The same power, but slower. The rhythm of heartbeats instead of thunder. Fire burns quickly. Water endures. Fire shouts revelation. Water whispers transformation. The gospel begins in stillness with a priest in the temple, Zechariah, standing between the old law and the new dawn. In the silence of his doubt, the angel speaks, and the river of grace begins to flow. Then comes Mary, her song echoing like the first spring after drought. My soul magnifies the Lord. From her womb, the divine takes on flesh, not in royal chambers, but in a manger among animals and straw. The river begins humbly, quietly, hidden from the proud, yet already the current knows its course. It will move through every valley of human sorrow and fill them with life. Luke's Christ is born among the poor, walks with the despised, and dies forgiving his enemies. He lives as water lives, entering all places, refusing no vessel, becoming what each moment needs. Every parable in Luke is a ripple of mercy spreading outward. The prodigal son, the good Samaritan, the lost sheep, all reveal the same truth, that the divine is not a judge standing apart, but a love that flows toward what is broken. The return of the son, the lifting of the wounded traveler, the finding of the lost. These are not moral lessons, but maps of the soul returning to itself. Luke's gospel tells us that forgiveness is not erasure, it is transformation. It does not deny the wound, it cleanses it. To forgive is not to forget, but to allow love to flow where pain once stood still. In Luke's world, salvation is not conquest, but restoration. Christ does not come to build an empire, but to heal the fractures in creation. Every story he tells, every touch he gives, is the sound of water meeting drought. The alchemy of Luke is tenderness, the power of the soft over the hard, the yielding over the unyielding. Fire shouts, earth endures, air declares, but water listens. It reflects the world without judgment, and in that reflection, truth appears. The modern soul struggles with this gospel. We live in an age that fears emotion, that mistakes gentleness for weakness. Yet Luke reminds us that compassion is the highest form of strength. It is not passivity, but courage. The courage to stay open when life wounds, to forgive when pride demands vengeance, to love when logic says to guard. In the Gospel of Luke, even death becomes an act of mercy. The thief beside Christ asks only to be remembered, and Christ answers not with delay, but immediacy. Today you will be with me in paradise. The words flow like a final benediction, the closing of one river into a greater sea. Luke's element, water, also carries reflection. He alone among the evangelists gives us the Magnificat, the songs, the intimate dialogues that mirror the soul's inner landscape. His gospel is not only narrative, it is contemplation. The reader becomes like a lake, holding stillness long enough for heaven to appear upon its surface. Where Mark demands action, Luke demands compassion. The work of water is not to ignite, but to integrate, to bring opposites into unity. The fire that once divided is cooled and clarified. The earth that once hardened becomes fertile again. Water reconciles. Christ, in Luke, is not the distant sovereign, but the friend who breaks bread with sinners, who sits at the table with the unwanted. His miracles flow through touch, not command. His kingdom grows not through conquest, but through kindness. In this gospel, the divine does not impose, it invites. It moves through free will, not force. It is the quiet revolution of love that changes the world from within. This is why Luke begins his account with order and certainty, that you may know the truth. Yet his truth is not cold logic. It is truth made warm by love, reason infused with compassion. In the work, water teaches us to listen, to flow, to surrender without losing direction. The alchemist who works with water knows that purity is not achieved by control, but by continual movement. Stagnant water decays. Flowing water renews. The same is true for the soul. To stay alive, it must move through sorrow, through joy, through forgiveness, through understanding. Luke's Christ is that movement made flesh. When he meets the woman who washes his feet with her tears, the world sees scandal, but he sees worship. Tears are the body's water of remembrance, the salt of what the heart can no longer hold in silence. Through her tears, the woman anoints him before his death, and through her act, he reveals that love redeems what law condemns. Luke's gospel also carries the most radiant telling of resurrection. Not thunder, not spectacle, but quiet recognition. On the road to Emmaus, the risen Christ walks beside two men who do not know him. He speaks, he listens, and their hearts burn within them. Only when he breaks bread do they see. That is Luke's revelation, that the divine walks beside us unnoticed until we open our hearts enough to recognize it in the ordinary. Water hides in plain sight. It takes the shape of every vessel, but remains itself. This is why Luke ends with joy. His gospel begins with song and ends with blessing. It starts in stillness and ends in movement, the rhythm of a river returning to the sea. For the modern seeker, Luke is the reminder that the path is not only made of will and trial, but also of tenderness. The work of fire purifies, but the work of water heals. Without mercy, the flame becomes tyranny. Without emotion, the truth becomes cruelty. To live the gospel of Luke is to allow the divine to flow through you, to speak gently, to act with empathy, to carry warmth into a cold world. It is to let your presence become a river where others can rest and be renewed. Every time you forgive, you move with Luke's current. Every time you listen instead of judge, you let the river widen. Every time you choose compassion over pride, you feed the eternal ocean. Water remembers everything, but it holds no grudges. It flows on, teaching us that love is not the denial of pain, but its transmutation. That is the sacred alchemy of Luke, to turn grief into wisdom and tears into holy water. And when at last the work of water is done, what remains is clarity, the calm after storm, the peace after fire, the reflection of heaven upon a still heart. Luke teaches us that in the end, it is not the flame or the thunder that saves the world, but the river, flowing quietly through every heart that dares to remain open. The Gospel of Luke is the gospel of healing. It calls us to remember that even in the fiercest work, compassion is the final refinement. We began upon the earth, we passed through fire, and now we flow through water, gentler, deeper, purified. The soul, once hardened by struggle, begins to soften. The work continues, not toward escape, but toward wholeness. And when the waters have done their task, what remains is light reflected upon their surface, the next step of the journey, rising upward toward the breath of air. The Gospel of John, the breath of revelation. If Luke is the river that heals, then John is the breath that gives life. His words do not move in sequence like history. They rise like wind, invisible yet everywhere. John's Gospel is not written to tell a story. It is written to awaken memory. It begins not with a genealogy, not with a manger or a lineage, but with vibration itself. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos. Sound before speech, truth before time, being before becoming. Here, the element of air enters. It is thought, revelation, spirit, the unseen medium through which all creation travels. Fire burns, water flows, earth holds, but air breathes life into them all. John's Gospel is that breath, the invisible rhythm that turns silence into voice and thought into light. John writes not as a witness of events, but as one who has seen beyond them. His gospel is vision. He begins where the others end, with understanding. He no longer describes the divine working through matter. He describes matter dissolving back into the divine. The others show Christ among men. John shows Christ within them. His is the gospel of revelation, the moment when the seeker no longer looks outward but inward and discovers that the breath of God is already moving within their own lungs. Every sentence in John is air, pure, weightless, eternal. It speaks of movement, connection, transcendence. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but cannot tell where it comes from or where it goes. So is everyone born of the Spirit. The Gospel of John is the gospel of spirit made visible through understanding. It is the highest ascent of the work, the moment when the alchemist no longer works upon matter, but upon perception itself. Where Matthew builds, Mark burns, and Luke heals, John reveals. His words are less instruction than vibration, designed not to teach, but to transform the way the reader sees. The first words, "In the beginning was the Word," are not only scripture, they are cosmology. The ancients believed that air carried both sound and thought. Breath was the proof of life, and speech was the proof of consciousness. For John, the Word is not sound. It is divine awareness speaking itself into existence. Before creation, there was breath, and in that breath, intention. That is the mystery of air. It is invisible, yet it carries all things. It moves through everything and belongs to nothing. John's Christ is that breath in human form, the Logos made flesh. He speaks and the dead rise. He exhales and the Spirit descends. Every miracle in this gospel is an act of communication between seen and unseen, matter and meaning. The first miracle John records is not healing, but transformation, water into wine. It is the perfect symbol of the work of air, the transmutation of essence without losing substance. What is common becomes sacred, what is ordinary becomes revelation. Through air, the divine reveals its pattern, that nothing truly disappears, only changes state. Breath becomes wind, sound becomes speech, truth becomes flesh. John's Gospel also holds the most profound conversations with Nicodemus, with the Samaritan woman, with Pilate. Each dialogue is a play between ignorance and illumination, matter and spirit, question and revelation. Air is the element of thought, and thought, when pure, becomes prayer. When Christ tells Nicodemus, "You must be born again," he is not speaking of flesh, but of breath, of consciousness reborn through awareness. To be born again is to breathe again, to let the old air leave and the new enter. It is to release the stale knowledge of the world and inhale the living truth of spirit. John's Christ is luminous. He is not only teacher, but revelation itself, light moving through form. He declares, "I am the light of the world," and in that light, the shadow of separation disappears. Yet his light is not the harsh blaze of fire, but the subtle brilliance of dawn. It does not burn, it reveals. It exposes not to condemn, but to clarify. This is why the Gospel of John contains no exorcisms, no parables, no genealogies. Air needs none. It does not wrestle or argue. It simply fills the space available to it. John's message is direct. Once you breathe in truth, you no longer need to fight illusion. It dissolves on its own. The miracles of John, the healing of the blind man, the raising of Lazarus, are not demonstrations of divine power, but of divine understanding. Christ does not command these acts, he embodies them. When he calls Lazarus forth, it is not only the man who awakens, but the principle of life itself, breath re-entering body. And when he gives sight to the blind, it is the mind that opens before the eyes do. For in the gospel of air, all healing begins with vision. John's Christ speaks of union. I and the Father are one. The work has come full circle. No longer building the temple, no longer surviving the fire, no longer healing the wound. Now all becomes one breath, one being, one awareness. Here lies the highest alchemy, the uniting of opposites through understanding. Where the other Gospels bring the elements into harmony, John makes them transparent. In air, everything becomes both medium and message. That is why John gives us the image of the Holy Spirit as breath, descending upon the disciples like wind. Fire appeared at Pentecost, but air carried it. The flame could not spread without breath. Every tongue of fire is born of wind. And so, in the work, air is revelation made movement, the invisible intelligence that connects all things. To breathe consciously is to commune with God. The ancients called air the messenger, for it moves between realms. So too does John's Gospel, between heaven and earth, idea and embodiment, word and silence. His writing floats, weightless but mighty, carrying revelation like fragrance through a still room. Modern minds seek truth through accumulation. More words, more data, more argument. But John teaches that truth is not found by adding, but by removing. The less cluttered the mind, the clearer the wind. The clearer the wind, the purer the sound of spirit. This is the gospel of simplicity, of being, not becoming, of knowing, not believing, of seeing, not searching. John's Christ moves differently. He walks not in haste, but in harmony. He knows the timing of all things because he moves with the rhythm of divine breath. He says, "My time has not yet come," and when it does, he walks willingly into it. Air knows when to stir and when to still. It moves mountains through erosion and carries seeds across continents, yet it remains invisible. That is its paradox. The most powerful element cannot be seen. So it is with spirit. The greatest truths are not those we can name, but those we can feel moving quietly through us. The pause between words, the breath between thoughts, the silence that reveals all things. In the Passion, according to John, even the crucifixion is transfigured. It is no longer the tragedy of death, but the consummation of union. When Christ declares, "It is finished," he is not defeated, he is fulfilled. The breath that began creation returns to its source. And when he releases that breath, it is not a cry of despair, but an exhalation of completion. Spirit leaves body, not in loss, but in expansion, the wind carrying flame back to heaven. At the tomb, Mary Magdalene finds not absence, but transformation. The voice she hears calling her name is the wind of recognition, the breath of love, proving that death cannot silence communion. John ends his gospel, not with command, but with invitation. Follow me. It is not an order. It is an echo of breath. The same air that gave life in Genesis now moves again, calling each soul to awaken. The Gospel of John is the gospel of the unseen. It is the element of truth beyond form, the breath that sustains the flame, the whisper that keeps the waters in motion. It is consciousness realized. Where the others teach how to build, endure, and heal, John teaches how to be. The work reaches its highest octave here, when the alchemist stops striving and starts breathing. The fire within no longer consumes, it illuminates. The water no longer flows outward, it reflects inward. The earth no longer holds, it supports. And in the middle of them all, air moves, unseen, unowned, eternal. This is the state the ancients called spirit, when all elements are in harmony and the breath of God becomes the breath of man. John is the whisper behind all revelation. He teaches us that every word we speak, every thought we hold, is either wind that carries life or dust that blinds the eye. To speak truth is to breathe with God. To lie is to pollute the air we all share. Therefore, the work of air is responsibility, not only to truth, but to clarity. The seeker must learn to breathe clean, to think pure, to let every word be an act of creation, not corruption. In the silence after speech, in the breath before action, the Spirit waits. That is where the Gospel of John lives, not in the noise of the world, but in the breath that moves through it. We have walked the four paths: earth, fire, water, and air. We have built, burned, healed, and breathed. And now, as the four harmonize, the fifth arises, the soul, the quintessence, the spirit that unites all things. It is no longer something to seek, it is what we have become. This is the revelation of John, not that God descended to man, but that man awakens to the God already within. For the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and that Word now speaks in us. The fifth element, the Spirit, the union of all. Four pillars stand in the house of creation: earth, fire, water, and air. Each speaks with its own voice, yet none are complete alone. The ancients knew this, the mystics lived by it, but they also whispered of something beyond, a hidden essence that binds the four together, the invisible thread woven through all existence. They called it spirit. The alchemists called it the quintessence, the fifth. The philosophers called it anima mundi, the soul of the world. The prophets called it breath of God. But all spoke of the same mystery, the point where all opposites meet and dissolve, where matter remembers it was always light. We have walked the path through the 4 Gospels. We have stood upon the earth of Matthew, the ground of faith. We have burned in the fire of Mark, the courage of transformation. We have flowed with the water of Luke, the compassion that heals. We have breathed the air of John, the revelation of spirit. Now we stand where they converge, the silent center, the still flame, the axis of the work. Spirit is not a fifth among equals. It is the life within them all. It is the intelligence of fire, the memory of water, the stability of earth, the freedom of air gathered into one consciousness. It is unity remembered. The ancients said that to find the fifth is to find the divine within the self. For the work was never about changing the world. It was about awakening the one who perceives it. Spirit begins where separation ends. It is not created, it is revealed. It waits beneath every layer of illusion, like a flame beneath ash, patient, eternal. And when the 4 elements finally learn to dance in harmony, spirit rises between them like music, unseen but unmistakable. This is the moment of realization that heaven was never above and earth never below. They are the 2 faces of one being. In the language of alchemy, spirit is the marriage of the opposites, the conjunction of sun and moon, of fire and water, of masculine and feminine, of matter and consciousness. In the gospel, this is the mystery of Christ, God and man as one, infinite and finite, united in love. The spirit is that love itself, not the emotion, but the force that moves through all existence and holds it together. It is the reason atoms orbit, stars are born, and hearts seek one another in the dark. The spirit is not somewhere else. It is here, in the pause between breaths, in the silence between words, in the stillness behind thought. It is what remains when you stop searching. It does not arrive with noise or revelation, but with recognition. It whispers, you are never separate. In the work, this is called coagula, the gathering, after the dissolution of old forms through fire and water, after the purification of matter and mind, the pieces reassemble, not as they were, but as they truly are. Spirit is the pattern that emerges when all illusions fall away. Each element has prepared us for this. From earth, we learn to stand, to root, to endure. Without grounding, spirit becomes fantasy. From fire, we learned to act, to burn away the false and reveal the pure. Without passion, spirit becomes passivity. From water, we learn to feel, to flow, to forgive, to understand. Without compassion, spirit becomes cold. From air, we learn to see, to perceive, to speak, to awaken. Without clarity, spirit becomes confusion. And when these 4 find balance, the 5th emerges naturally. It cannot be forced, only allowed. It appears not as thunder, but as light returning to its source. Spirit is awareness. It is the consciousness that experiences all without clinging to any. The ancients symbolized it as a circle with a point in the center, the soul anchored in eternity, the eye of stillness amid the movement of creation. The work ends where it began, in the self, but no longer the self we knew. What once was divided is now whole. What once sought God now breathes as God. This is the true resurrection, not of flesh, but of understanding. The moment the alchemist realizes the gold was never in the crucible, but in the one who tended it. The spirit of the 5th is not static. It moves through cycles, endlessly birthing new worlds. Each time the 4 elements fall out of harmony, it calls them back, whispering through conscience, intuition, inspiration. Every art, Every act of love, every flash of truth is the Spirit reminding creation of its source. To live in spirit is to live as harmony embodied, to be fully in the world, yet not bound by it. It is to act without attachment, to give without loss, to love without condition. The Spirit speaks through simplicity, through the smile of a stranger, through the rhythm of breath, through the silence after understanding. It has no voice, yet it is the origin of all voices. This is why the Christ of John breathes upon the disciples and says, "Receive the Holy Spirit." He gives them not a doctrine, but a rhythm, the divine breath that turns believers into creators. The Spirit is not meant to be worshipped, it is meant to be lived. In the modern world, spirit is the most forgotten element. We see the body, earth. We feel emotion, water. We express will, fire. We think and speak, air. But few remember the silence behind them all. We call it instinct, presence, awareness, anything but what it truly is. Yet it is the very substance of our being. It is not an experience we have. It is what has every experience. To live without spirit is to live in fragments, scattered among desires, fears, ambitions. But when spirit awakens, the pieces remember each other. The many become one. This is not mysticism, it is clarity. The Spirit is the simplest thing there is. It does not complicate, it unites. It says, "You are the earth that endures. You are the fire that transforms. You are the water that loves. You are the air that reveals. And beyond all this, you are the Spirit that contains them all." When the Spirit speaks, it does not command, it calls. It does not promise reward, it reminds you of your nature. It does not need temples, for it dwells in every living thing. The Spirit is not apart from the world, it is the world seen rightly. It is the silence behind every sound, the space within every form, the awareness watching all changes, but itself remaining unchanged. This is the kingdom of heaven within you that Christ spoke of. It is not a place, but a perception, a state in which nothing is separate, because everything is sacred. The Spirit is that seeing. In the work, the moment spirit awakens is the moment the seeker disappears. There is no longer I and God, matter and spirit, seeker and truth. There is only presence, the one flame appearing as countless sparks. This is why the ancients said, "Solve et coagula," dissolve and rejoin. You dissolve the false self in fire and water, then rejoin what remains in spirit. The gold that results is consciousness purified of illusion. And when you live from that gold, you become what the Gospels describe in different tongues, the image of the divine in motion. Spirit does not reject the world, it completes it. It does not flee the body, it makes it luminous. It does not destroy desire, it refines it into will aligned with truth. When the Spirit moves through you, everything you touch becomes part of the work. A conversation, a gesture, a silence. The mundane becomes sacred because you see it clearly for what it is, spirit playing at form. This is why the Christ of the fifth element no longer preaches or argues. He simply is. Presence itself becomes the sermon. We often imagine enlightenment as distance, as escape from the human, but the true awakening of spirit is the opposite. It is the full descent of divinity into the human heart. When the Spirit rises, it does not lift you away, it draws heaven down through you. It does not make you more than human, it makes you completely human, the divine expressed through form without distortion. That is the final stage of the work, To walk the world is the union of heaven and earth, knowing there is no boundary between them. Spirit is not the end, it is the beginning without end. It is the eternal flame that lights each new cycle, the quiet center from which all movement springs. The four elements are teachers. The spirit is the realization. They are the roads. The spirit is the destination that reveals itself as the traveler. Every breath you take, every act of awareness, every moment of silence, that is spirit reminding you you were never apart from the divine. The fifth is not found by seeking, but by stopping, not by ascent, but by surrender, not by reaching upward, but by seeing clearly here. The spirit cannot be owned, spoken, or proven, only lived. It is the light behind your eyes right now, the awareness reading these words, the listener behind every sound. It is not something to become, it is what you have always been. And so, the work is fulfilled. The earth stands firm, the fire burns clean, the water flows pure, the air breathes freely, and in their harmony the spirit shines through all. This is the philosopher's stone, the Christ within, the awakening of man as divine vessel. The ancients knew, when spirit awakens, the world itself is transmuted. Gold is no longer a metal, it is consciousness. Light is no longer distant, it is identity. And death is no longer the end, it is return. The myth of the fallen one ends where it began, with the flame, the breath, the heart, the soil, all remembering they were never separate. The fall was never punishment. It was the descent of spirit into experience, the dream of forgetting so that remembrance could be born. Now the dream is ending. The flame stirs again. You who have walked through earth, fire, water, and air, you have walked through yourself. And now you stand at the center where everything meets. This is the fifth element. This is spirit, the eternal, unbroken song. Breathe. Remember, and let the work continue.